We have inter. What it means is between. So when you are between one thing and another, okay, in the case of interjection, and like I told you guys, I'm keeping to the iactio, iectus verb in Latin in order to simplify things until we get to the roots. So it's not a common word at all to interject. Let me interject. You know, it's kind of formal. People say, oh, let me interject. What does that mean? It literally means throw between. Throw between what? Depends on if there's 3 people or 2 people. If there's 3 people, it means let me throw between you 2 people. And if it's just you and me, then let me throw between you and me. And what does that mean? It means between what's been said and what I want to say instead. Okay? So it literally means throw between. And an interjection, as we will learn today, when we encounter the suffix yun or shun, okay, it means state of or being, something like that. And so it means the state of or being throwing between. To interject versus interrupt, what's the difference? To interrupt comes from rumpo in Latin, meaning to break. So it means to break between. So when you interrupt, you're usually interrupting people, 2 different people, whereas you can interject with just one person or with 2 people. So that's pretty much the main difference. Okay, to interrupt means to break into, and to interject means to throw into. So you're throwing words between 2 people or between what's just been said by one person and what you want to say instead, whereas when you interrupt, you usually have 2 people and you're interrupting between those 2 people. Okay, so there we go. Just to remind you, there is our interjection part of speech there at the top center of the screen. And so an interjection is one of those, you know, stay, like to a dog if you command the dog to stay, or you say to someone, go over there. You're kind of ordering them to do something, okay? So you're throwing between yourself and them and kind of telling them to do something, an action verb. And then ultra means beyond, okay? So ultrasound is that instrument that is used, as it says here, diagnostic ultrasound, sonography, imaging method using high frequency sound waves to produce images of structures. So you're using sound waves to produce images, and that's why it's called beyond sound, because it goes beyond the usual sound spectrum. Okay, it's not a very common prefix, but you know, we're doing our best to cover all of the most important ones. And so every once in a while you're going to encounter it. Okay, one more page and then we're on to suffixes. So what are the last prefixes we're going to look at? Notice there what's going on is it's between with and without. So everything up to now has been in relation to that circle, whether it be go toward the circle, go away from the circle, be inside of the circle, be outside of it, go outside of it, go down from it, blah, blah, blah. All those different kinds of relationships that were represented by the prefixes. Now we have some interesting ones that have to do not with in relation to when it comes to interacting with it, but rather either being with it in general or being away from it in general. Okay, so with or without. So for example, when you're dealing with a symphony orchestra, phone, okay, not phony, that's a little different, but phone in ancient Greek means voice. And so a symphony literally means voices being played together. Okay, and so that terminology is used with classical music especially when you talk about the different instruments having its own voice. A symphony is literally voices together. Phone, sim. And the sim means together, and that's Greek. Okay, whereas the cum, like magna cum laude or summa cum laude, or regular old cum laude. Okay, now you will notice that even though I say syn there, S-Y-N, that means with in Greek, it's M instead of N. Okay, get used to it. Throughout the semester, and what I've tried to get across that first day of exciting stuff about all those sounds and all that is just how changeable, how variable, how mutable, how malleable all these different sounds are, how they turn into other things. So we have conform, con means with, and here we go again, the M turning into an N. Okay, get used to it. Why would the M turn into an M? They're so close to each other. Okay, the question would be, why does a B turn into an M? It doesn't. Okay, and M does, because try like one of those auctioneers. You know, it's not as hard as it sounds. Okay, so that's why. Sounds that are very close to each other on that spectrum that we looked at, or that continuum we looked at the beginning of the semester, is what to look for when determining any sort of rhyme or reason there is to things turning into other things. Okay, so to conform, whether you're talking about conforming, one person conforming to another, or to a bunch of people doing things, whatever, it literally means to form with. So if you have a bunch of people looking like each other, doing things like each other, whatever, and someone conforms to them, it literally means forming with them, falling into line with them, so to speak. Okay, in ancient Greek, on is one way to say without. And so when you are anonymous, on is the not part, or without part, and then the onem means name. Onuma in ancient Greek means name. So it means without a name. Okay, and as we'll learn today, the us is a suffix that we're going to encounter throughout the semester. Okay, it just means pretty much state of or being. Okay, so without a name. To secede, if you're talking in this case, 1861, Texas seceding from the Union, and sometimes California talks about it, or parts of California, or other parts of the country. Every once in a while, there's talk about secession. Okay, so to secede comes from the Latin. The seed comes from cato, which is pronounced with a hard C, like a K in Latin. Cato means to go, one of many ways to say go. So it means to go apart. The se means away or apart. Okay, so to go away from the Union would be to secede. And then secession is just a way to turn it into a noun. And we're going to encounter the ion suffix later today. And here we are at the very end of the prefixes. Congratulations. Remember that scary chart that you all didn't believe me when I said that we were going to get through it? Well, we did. And here's the end. So we have various ways to say not. Okay, so non, such as non-fat, when you're dealing with, say, milk, non-fat milk. And then uncool, Fonzie, the paragon of coolness, at least in the 70s. When I was around, I was there for the first runs of Happy Days. That's how young I am. There he is, kind of saying, uncool. You know, he either said, oh, that's cool, but then sometimes he also called people or what they did uncool as well, with the thumbs down. And so you're not cool. And then the last one is the most interesting. Not necessarily of all the words we've gone through, but certainly out of these three. And that is infant. What is an infant? Very simple. Fari, F-O-R, means I speak, one of the many ways in Latin to say I speak. And then the N means not, so it means without speaking. Isn't that cool? So an infant literally means doesn't speak. It's kind of nice. Not everybody knows that. Okay. Now, you may have noticed, I'm sure you did, that the in, we've already covered it before, and it meant in or into, didn't it? Well, sorry, but it means either in/into, or it means not. Okay? In is one of the more versatile prefixes. Okay? Now let's get into suffixes. Now I have to admit, suffixes were hard to make somewhat palatable and, dare I say, interesting. So I'll do my best. Let's just say that I think I've improved presenting them over how I used to, which was pretty much doing nothing but listing them one after another. Now I'm going to try to deal with them as these days, thanks to you guys, as a thing. Okay, I'm going to try to make it something that is distinct from the prefixes and the prepositions we've looked at before in an interesting way. So, prefixes, like prepositions, express different relationships between people and things. We already saw that. And we also talked about how prefixes are built from, that's a little too loud. Let me turn it down a little. Prefixes are built, prefixes are built from prepositions. It all begins with prepositions. Why do you need prepositions? First of all, they're separate words that express relationships between the verb and the object of the verb. Or if you want to say the subject of the verb and the object of the verb, right? So the dog walks to the park. What you're saying is kind of two different things. You're saying something about the dog and how he's walking, and you're also saying something about the walking itself, okay? To the park, as opposed to what? In front of the park, outside of the park, without the park, and various other possible prepositions. Okay, so in this case, the dog walks toward the house, one of my favorite prepositions because it's odd in Latin, ad, and I told you guys that throughout the semester we're going to see more than any other prefix the mutability, the changeability of this prefix. It turns into AC, it turns into all kinds of other things depending on what the root that follows it starts with. Okay, so the dog walks toward the house. Preposition toward establishes a relationship between walks and house, or if you want to say between the dog and the house, because the dog is walking in a certain way, i.e. toward the house. You can, for example, have into the house or outside of the house, like I said, or something else like that. Okay, so that was prefixes. So the preposition odd means toward, and then I just want to remind you about adjective. Okay, just a little more practice. Add by itself is a preposition that means toward, as we've already learned, and then it can be connected or affixed or fixed to a root, such as adjective, and it serves exactly the same function as it does when it stands alone as a preposition. I just want you to notice that, you guys. Okay? So in Latin, when we say canis ad domum ambulat, the dog walks toward the house. Toward stands by itself, and it's a preposition, and just like in English, a preposition always needs an object. Toward, standing by itself, doesn't make any sense. You walk up to someone and say, hey, yesterday I was walking toward, and they think you're crazy, or very creative. Okay, sometimes there's a fine line between them, right? Okay, whereas you need an object of that preposition, in this case, domum, meaning house, okay? Domicile, things like that, okay? Adjective, all you're doing there is you're putting that preposition at the beginning of a word. You're attaching it to the root of that word, which is yakio or yekt, like we talked about, the throw. And that's why an adjective is a word that is thrown toward another word. Okay, so it's a quality word. So you say the happy dog, and happy would be the adjective because it's thrown toward dog. Suffixes, on the other hand, are the opposite of prefixes in this sense, that prefixes are attached to the beginnings of words, suffixes are attached to the ends of words. They're both fixes, it's just that the one is before and the other is after. This book, which I love, and which I recommend that you get, it's out of print, but you can get it on Amazon for like 3 cents, I think, or something, one of those things. Great book, but I'm going to take a little issue here with my friend Skeet, who says this: the number of suffixes in modern English is so great that an attempt to exhibit them all would tend to confusion. Okay, true, and I'm not going to throw them all at you, so don't worry. There's scores of them. But what I am going to do is I'm going to analyze them with you enough so that you understand that they're not as tricky as you would be led to believe by, for example, reading that same page that he quotes that on. Because you have a million, so many of them, and you're just like, oh my gosh, it's a barrage of endings of words. You will be happy to learn that we can whittle down suffixes pretty much into 3 categories. Okay, and so once we've done that, what value does that have? Throughout the semester, we're not going to have to stop at every single word that we learn with every single root that we learn and say, hey, that the suffix means this, the suffix means that. We're going to have internalized, to the best of our ability at least, what those suffixes mean, so we don't spend as much time, or if you will, brain power on the suffixes, let alone the prefixes, as on the roots, because what we're going to do is we're going to, after we do the suffixes, the rest of the semester is nothing but roots. And what we're going to do is we're going to do 2 or 3, maybe 4, depending on how fast we go, roots per class session, and there are going to be several words under that root, okay, that are derived from the root. And what's the most interesting thing to do about that is you look at the different ways words are built from the same root. And getting back to your question about the Latin-Greek thing, as maddening as it is that there's no system to when it's Greek, when it's Latin, when it's German, when it's Anglo-Saxon, when it's Russian, when it's whatever, but we can find patterns to some extent. when it comes to the meanings of things. Not quite as much what languages we're dealing with as the meanings of things. And so what I ask you guys to do today, more than any other day this semester, maybe not, throughout the semester I ask you to do it too, is to expand your horizons, expand your mind enough to appreciate the similarities between these different suffixes, despite the fact that this quote here is meant to warn you against trying to do that very thing, to systematize them or to come up with any kind of rhyme or reason to understand suffixes. I submit to you that there is a way to do that, at least to some extent, and we're going to try that together. Okay, so let's start with this. Compared to a prefix, which expresses a relationship, so I threw this at you a bunch of times, the relationship between throwing one word toward another word. A suffix deals with identity. It deals with what something is more than any relationship between elements. So what do I mean by that? We're going to have to kind of get a sense of what that means. When you look at all the suffixes, all the most important ones, all the ones that are most common, and we'll get more into what that means later. There are certain patterns that come into what those that are most common have in common with each other. But there are two main things that suffixes are telling us. This is a pretty valuable thing, I think. One of them is what is the case. So being. You're talking about a suffix that explains the being of something, the existence of something, what it is. And this will mean a lot more to you as we get some practice. And an example of that is happiness. Happy is an adjective. The dog is happy. Okay? But what is the noun that conveys that quality of happy? And that is happiness in English. Okay? Now, there are going to be various ways to convey that same idea of ness. Okay? For example, T, or just regular old Y. Okay? Lots of different suffixes mean being. Being what? Being the thing that the root says. You got me? Okay, there are going to be a lot of different suffixes, and so Skeet wants us to be scared by all that ridiculous variety of suffixes there are. But you will be relieved, or at least believe me, you should be. I am, because I try to teach this stuff, but it's a relief to discover that almost all of the suffixes have to do with being. Just simply saying something is what? Whatever the root says. Real simple. But then another one that's big is what something does. But unlike the being suffixes, the suffixes that deal with identity in the sense of existence, such as happiness, which means the state of being happy, or just simply being happy, okay? When you're dealing with these suffixes that have to do with doing, they almost exclusively have to do with making things. So you can get a little philosophical here and notice that almost all of the common suffixes we deal with have to do with either being or doing. And think about it. What else is there? There's who you are and there's what you do. What else is there? Okay? You can expand those things into other areas, such as what I do for a living. Okay? But that's doing. Just think about it. Or how I relate to someone. That's doing, or that's being, depending on how you look at it. It always comes down to that. It comes down to being or doing. But whereas there are many, 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 many suffixes that express being, there are only 4. And I love when you can whittle things down to just a tiny number. Only 4 extremely common suffixes that express making in English. So say I have a picture of a character, Mickey Mouse. And I want to turn that character into a cartoon that moves. What is it called doing to that? To animate. Okay? So what do? You animate it. Okay? Anima in Latin means, for want of among other things, soul, spirit, mind, depending on what historical period you're talking about. Okay? As time goes on, it becomes more what we would think of as soul, immortal soul, etc. Call it soul. 8 is one of the 4 suffixes that means make. So it literally means to make a soul. And we'll get back to that in a sec. Let's also consider this one, ness. And happiness means being happy, lots of being, lots of being. This is pretty much what I just said. Never mind. Okay. There we got the 8 in the word animate. Anima soul, and then to animate means to make souls. Isn't that rad? To turn pictures that are, if not dead, then let's just say static, make them alive. Pretty creative, right? Whoever it was that was at the beginning of making all these words up, and it's very rare that there's any historical documentation about when they were, because they go so far back. But it must have been kind of cool coming up with ideas about how to combine elements into making up English words, right? There's another one that means being. Okay, now I'm being random right now, just for one more example, and then we're going to get a little more systematic about it. So here's another example. We have another being suffix. So if we want to put the shun or ion, depending on what's going on phonetically, ion or shun, meaning being or state of whatever, on to animate, right? So we did anima, meaning soul, 8 meaning make, and then you put another suffix onto the 8, which is shun, and that means being or the state of. So it means the state of making a soul. That's a little coming attraction, a little trailer for how we'll be combining forms throughout the semester. Understanding how they go together, how they make meaning, and the more practice we get, the more predictable it'll be how these things are formed. But it won't be predictable which particular suffixes are used for which roots, okay? Because there just isn't a science to it. And we will do our best to come up with some sorts of patterns that we can detect in their use.